Alright, let's rewind way back to ancient times, and I'm talking about the civilizations like Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, where the first forms of taxation were born. Let's start in ancient Egypt. Around 3000 BC, the pharaohs introduced one of the earliest recorded taxes, the grain tax. This wasn't just a give me a bit of your crop situation. The Egyptians were undergoing monumental projects like building the pyramids and temples, so they needed masses of resources. Farmers were required to give a portion of their crop as a form of payment to the pharaoh's government. This grain was stored then in massive granaries, essentially acting as a type of government savings account. But here's the catch: Egypt was one of the first civilizations to actually establish a central bureaucracy to collect and distribute those taxes. In many ways, it set the groundwork for how taxes would be collected in more complex states for centuries to come. Then let's head over to Mesopotamia, where around about 2500 BC, taxes were also levied in kind, meaning they were paid on goods or services rather than just a currency. The Code of Ur-Nammu from around 2100 BC is one of the earliest known legal documents to mention taxes. It's often considered the first written legal code as well, and it laid out the taxes on livestock, land, and even people. Yes, it actually taxed some people in some cases, specifically to support the military and the royal family. But taxes weren't just random. They were essential to maintain order in a complex society that was developing its first major cities and trade routes. Think of this as the beginning of a social contract. You contribute and the state provides protection and order in return. Then we fast forward to the ancient Greeks. Taxes evolved even further. This was around 5th century BC. They used a system called aisphora, a type of wealth tax. Citizens, particularly wealthy citizens, pay tax to fund public works, military campaigns, and temples. It's one of the first times we see taxes directly supporting democracy. Yes, that's democracy in action. In Athens, citizens participated directly in political life, but their contributions were essential to the upkeep of the city-state. Taxes helped fund everything from public festivals to the famed Parthenon. It wasn't just keeping the rulers happy, it was about sustaining the entire system of government and public life. And if you were a wealthy merchant or a landowner, the tax hit you in the wallet hard. Fast forward a few centuries further, and now we're in the Middle Ages, where taxes took on a whole new form. Imagine this: knights, castles, the whole feudal system. Sounds like a tax nightmare, and that's exactly what it was. Across medieval Europe, taxes were often collected in the form of labor or produce. The lords of the manor would tax peasants in exchange for the right to live and work on their land, sometimes even requiring the peasants to work for the lord's land for free. This is what we call the feudal tax. The nobles held power over large amounts of land, and the peasants were bound to work on it in exchange for protection. But the king, of course, also needed money, and that's where taxation came in. The king taxed not only the land but also the goods, and these taxes were used to fund wars, build the castles, and to consolidate their power. But, of course, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows for the lords. In 2015, the Magna Carta was signed in England, making it a turning point in the history of taxation. Why? Because this document forced King John to acknowledge the taxation should be done with the consent of the people rather than forced on them. The Magna Carta didn't just protect noble land rights, it ensured that the taxes couldn't be arbitrarily raised without the consent of the realm. It was a huge step towards what would later become the modern idea of a social contract and democratic governance. Now let's get to the part where most of us actually care about, the taxes and that we know and love today. How did we get here? Well, it took a few thousand years, some revolutions, and a hell of a lot of paperwork. During the French Revolution in 1789, taxes became a major point of contention. The French monarchy had imposed heavy taxes on the peasantry, who were already struggling, while the nobility was largely exempt. The tax burden on the poor was so unbearable, and the growing resentment sparked one of the most famous revolutions in history. The fall of the monarchy in 1792 led to new forms of taxation and aimed to create a more equitable system. This is where we see the beginning of the modern day income tax concept. They implemented tax based on wealth. While things got a little bit chaotic for a while, the idea that taxes should be paid more equitably became solidified. Meanwhile, across the pond in the United States, the idea of the federal income tax didn't even exist at the beginning. The first federal taxes were actually imposed to fund the Civil War in 1860s. These taxes were excise taxes on goods like tobacco and alcohol, but they were so unpopular that they repealed them after the war. It wasn't until the passage of the 16th Amendment in 1913 that the federal government gained the power to levy income taxes. This was monumental. It meant that broader swathes of the population, especially the wealthy, would pay the taxes on their income, not just on goods. This is when the modern concept of taxation started taking shape. Over in the UK, the first income tax was introduced by William Pitt the Younger in 1799 to fund the Napoleonic Wars. The tax was initially set at just 10%, but wars raged on and the British Empire extended and the rate increased. Eventually, income tax became a permanent fixture in British life, even though it started as a temporary measure. Why would they let up the money when they were getting it freely without any questions? Today, taxes come in all shapes and sizes, and you need a full-on degree in order to actually understand it all. From personal income tax to sales tax to property tax, even value-added tax. Every country has its own tax system, but the general idea is to fund government services like healthcare in most countries, infrastructure, defense. Let's have a little look at some interesting tax systems around the world. So in the US, the income tax ranges from 10% to 37% depending on how much you earn. Meanwhile, in countries like Sweden, the income tax rates can go as high as 57%, but it comes with free healthcare, education system, and other public services. Sweden has one of the highest tax rates in the world, but their social welfare programs are among the most comprehensive. Whilst in Japan, there's a unique tax called the consumption tax, which is similar to VAT. It's set at 10% and it helps fund Japan's social security projects. It's a big part of how Japan has managed to cope with the aging population and the associated cost of healthcare and pensions. In Dubai and many parts of the UAE, there's no income tax at all. Imagine that. But of course, the government gets its money from other sources like VAT, tourism related taxes. So if you're planning to live in Dubai, you'll stop paying taxes in normal traditional way. There's a side note on that. They're adding something sort of similar very shortly. Now, looking ahead, what's next for taxes? Well, the rise of technology and digital economies, the governments are starting to look at new ways to tax things like digital services, cryptos, and even data. Could we see a tax on data in the future? Imagine paying tax every time you post to social media or stream a show. Don't worry, the government hasn't figured out how to tax Netflix just yet, but they are definitely working on it. So there you have it, a brief history of taxes from ancient Egypt to the modern day tax system and beyond. It's been a long road, but one thing's for sure, taxes are here to stay. Like it or not, there are only two permanents in life, death and taxes. If you enjoyed this deep dive and want to learn more about taxes or personal finance, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and remember, no matter how you feel about taxes, they're just the price you pay for living in society. Thanks for watching.